A quiet cul-de-sac, chalk on sidewalks, a birthday cake cooling on the counter. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. She is the child you've seen 1,000 times. Tidy backpack, perfect handwriting, the kind of smile adults praise because it never causes trouble. But in the calm between candles and applause, a wish rises that shreds the script, and you will feel it before you hear it. The chill that says a mind can look ordinary and still be rehearsing shadows. We're not telling a story about evil. We're tracing the outline of silence. Think of a mind criminosa, born from small daily edits to the truth, of infancia traumatica, folded into manners and straight A's. If a deviant behavior wanted to hide, where better than inside good? If a forensic psychologist sat at that table, which Sinai's ignorados would they circle in red? The way she studies rules like they're weapons. The way she never asks why, only how. The way safety for her sounds like control. Before I reveal the gift, no normal child would ever ask for. Answer this. Would you have seen it coming? Would you have noticed the little rehearsals? A fascination here, a numbness there, those hairline fractures in empathy that don't show until the pressure is just right? Stay with me. The revelation is coming. And when you finally hear what she asked for, you'll have to decide whether you're listening to a plea for help or the first draft of a mente criminosa learning to speak. She blended in so completely that your eyes would slide past her. Front row seat, hands folded, pencils lined by length, the small discipline of a child who understands that order keeps the world from cracking. She was quiet in class, not the anxious silence of a fearful kid, but the measured stillness of someone running an experiment. The drawings at the top of the room were hers, arranged like trophies. Houses with tidy fences, trees with evenly spaced leaves, smiles that looked correct from across the room and wrong when you stood closer. You know that feeling when a picture carries a tiny echo that does not match the scene. That was the smile in crayon and the smile on her face. Almost right, not quite there. Teachers said she was mature. They loved that word for her, a label that sounds like a compliment and hides a warning. She did not need reminders. She did not beg for attention. She returned books on time with the corners unbent and the pages uncreased, as if the stories should not know anyone ever touched them. When the class went chaotic, she did not join, she observed. When the room went silent, she did not relax. She braced. In meetings, adults praised her responsibility. Nothing to worry about here. A model student, the kind who makes you imagine a bright future and forget to ask how the present feels. That is how ignored signs slip through the door wearing perfect posture. Home had a script too. Speak softly, or do not speak at all. Pass the salt before being asked. Clean the plate even when you are not hungry. Ask permission to use your own voice. She adapted like children do, translating survival into manners. No slammed doors, no raised volume. No tears unless hidden under running water. The house liked things neat, and she became the neatest thing in it. Some children push the world to see where it bends. She pulled herself inward, to keep anyone from noticing the bend at all. Criminal psychology has an unromantic way of describing this. Patterns begin early, often disguised as good. Behavior. A criminal mind does not appear fully formed. It learns how to make rehearsals look like routines. When control becomes the only kind of safety a child trusts, deviant behavior can wear a uniform that teachers reward. Maybe you have heard this in interviews where forensic psychology experts talk about the subtle choreography between fear and compliance. Not every quiet child is carrying a secret storm, but many storms begin in rooms where the rules are louder than love. Have you ever mistaken compliance for calm? Have you ever clapped for a performance because you were grateful it did not disrupt the show? There were small incidents you might overlook if you were not hunting for them. She never volunteered her birthday wish in class, though every other kid tripped over their own excitement. She memorized procedures with unnerving precision, not because she loved learning, but because knowing the steps kept panic at a distance. She watched the teacher demonstrate a new tool, and knew where every finger should go if you wanted to avoid a mistake. During group work, she assigned tasks to herself that required control of materials and kept people from touching them. It looked helpful. It was a boundary drawn in invisible ink. In the art room, she chose rulers and compasses instead of paint. Precision over expression. Straight lines over guesswork. Ask yourself why a 10-year-old might prefer instruments of certainty. Ask yourself why color felt dangerous. She had a way of scanning for exits without moving her head. She could hear adults in the next room and respond to the tone before the words arrived. Children learn many languages. She learned the language of footsteps and the translation of breath. At night, when the house settled, she would reorder the contents of her desk until the compartments matched her pulse. Pencils by length, paper clips by shape, notes written in the same pen. You could call it tidy. You could call it ritual. In the world of forensic psychology, you might call it a coping script that masquerades as personality. She did not believe in luck, only in the narrow safety that comes when nothing is out of place. Tell me, would you notice that difference if you were the parent? Would you read it as pride in her work? Or would you ask what happens when one thing refuses to line up? Every story of a mind drifting toward darkness has a moment where you want to reach into the past and pull the child back. You want to tell someone to look again at the smile that stops just short of the eyes. You want to ask why grown-ups called her mature, rather than asking where she learned to perform it. Maturity is often a costume stitched from necessity. If you carry a traumatic childhood in a small body, you learn to distribute its weight so nobody sees the strain. You pass as fine until you are alone. You pass as safe until the room is quiet enough to hear the alarm. When classmates tried to play rough, she froze, not from fear, but from calculation. Contact meant unpredictability. Unpredictability meant risk. She built her world out of rules, because rules did not reach out and grab. She loved board games with strict instructions and hated open play. She preferred reading manuals to fairy tales. Stories with magic ask you to surrender to wonder. Manuals promise that if you follow the steps, nothing unexpected will break. Have you ever used instructions as a shield? Have you ever felt safer with a checklist than with a hug you did not ask for? On report cards, the comments glowed. Exceptional focus, advanced comprehension, a pleasure to have in class. None of it was a lie. All of it was incomplete. A child can carry excellence and emptiness at the same time. The absence is what shapes the excellence. The ignored signs hide in the margins of praise. The teacher who wrote mature could not see the cost of becoming that way at 10. The question that refuses to leave us returns like a drumbeat. Where did she learn to want the thing she asked for? Not from cartoons, not from friends. She learned it the way children learn everything dangerous that feels like safety. She learned it by listening to what put the house at ease. She learned it by watching who held power and how they held it. She learned that possession could silence fear. She learned that control could stitch the edges of her breath back together. She learned that asking for the wrong thing is sometimes the only way a child knows to ask for help. You can stand in that kitchen now if you want and pretend you were there. Cake on the counter, balloons that say happy in bright letters. The adults relaxed because the performance looked perfect. The child rehearsing calm because perfection kept the peace. You can feel how thin the air becomes at the moment, just before a wish. You can hear the words forming, not as a threat, but as a blueprint for relief. Stay with that feeling. Stay with the question. If you had been there, would you have heard the alarm hidden inside the request? Because the answer to where she learned to want it is already in the room, and the rest of this story will make sure you cannot ignore it. The house ran on rules that never slept. Wake at the first alarm. Fold the blanket into sharp corners. Leave the sink shining. Keep your voice level. Keep your face pleasant. Keep your footsteps soft. Order was not preference. It was survival. In that pressure cooker, affection turned into a currency you had to earn with perfect timing. A joke landed wrong and the air cooled. A chore done late and the ledger reset to 0. Mistakes were not lessons. They were trials without appeal. Judgments delivered in the tight silence of a room where no explanation could be heard. Children adapt. She adapted until adaptation looked like nature. She learned the choreography of hypervigilance, how to read the room before crossing a threshold, how to rehearse an apology in her head for something that had not occurred yet. Intermittent rewards trained her better than any lecture. A gentle hand after a spotless day, a frozen stare after a single oversight. Forensic psychology uses ugly terms for this, reinforcement schedules and learned helplessness. But in a kitchen with a ticking clock, it felt simple. Do not trigger the storm. To survive, she mastered invisibility. It is a survival skill, polished by neglected kids who discover that being unseen is often safer than being loved inconsistently. She learned to pass by like a shadow against a darker wall, to reduce the sound of her breathing, to look busy when eyes turned her way, to vanish behind the efficiency of a child who does not need anything. Adults praise the effort and miss the reason. Praise arrived like sunshine through blinds, thin and divided. She stood in the slices and pretended it was enough. The calendar tracked more than days. It tracked weather patterns in the house. Mondays required silence. Midweek demanded performance. Weekends were coin flips you prepared for with spotless counters and erased fingerprints. There were rules inside the rules, a private taxonomy no one else could see. She learned that affection could be purchased with precision and that control could make the floor stop moving. She learned to anticipate hunger and set the table without being told, to watch faces for micro-expressions, to calculate risk the way other children calculate how many pieces of candy they can eat before dinner. The arithmetic of fear became her fluency. Every childhood pressure cooker needs a release valve, or the metal learns to sing. She chose rituals, routines disguised as comfort, comfort disguised as safety. Place shoes heel to toe, arrange pencils by gradient, stack plates in silent towers that reflected the kitchen light. Repeat the sequence until the heartbeat slowed. Criminal psychology would call it a coping mechanism, a ritualization that protects against chaos. To the untrained eye, it looked like neatness. To her, it felt like oxygen. Where was mischief in all of this? It tried to surface in small ways, a scribble hidden under a stack of perfect drawings, a laugh held a beat too long, a door closed with a touch of force. Each time the house noticed, each time the system corrected. Second guess with me, is that mischief or the first fracture? Under pressure, even good porcelain begins to craze. Hairline lines that only appear under certain light. She learned to polish those surfaces until no one could see the map of stress running across them. The economy of affection taught her to audit every interaction. Ask for nothing you cannot justify. Offer more than you are asked for. Anticipate the objection and neutralize it with proof of compliance. This is how a child's nervous system becomes a courtroom. Evidence, verdict, sentence. There is no appeal, only performance. She did not cry where anyone could hear. She did not ask why a rule existed. Why is dangerous, when rules are weapons? How is safer? How do I meet the standard? How do I keep the peace? How do I avoid the consequence that arrives without warning? The outside world saw a well-trained child and applauded. Inside, a different education continued. She learned that control is the closest thing to comfort. She learned that power can feel like safety, even when it is borrowed or imagined. She learned that silence is a reliable shield, and that secrets can make your spine stand straight when everything else wants to bend. The mind formed around those lessons like clay around wire. Bend the wire and you bend the shape. Leave it long enough and the shape begins to hold. There were nights when the house exhaled and she could hear herself again. On those nights, she inventoried her tiny empire. A room she kept spotless, a backpack ready for inspection, a schedule memorized down to the minute. The rituals were not just about cleanliness. They were about proving that nothing would be left to chance. Forensic casework often notes this compulsion, the conversion of anxiety into order, the way neglected affection makes a child swap warmth for predictability. Ask yourself how many times you have mistaken a tidy surface for a calm soul. Memory is a selective archivist, yet there are scenes that refuse to fade. The plate that slipped and shattered, the punishment that fell faster than the shards, the day she laughed too loudly and the temperature in the room fell 10 degrees. The instant she chose to disappear rather than defend herself because arguments were unwinnable. Each memory etched a rule deeper. Do not draw attention. Do not enjoy too openly. Do not lose track of the script. This is what a pressure cooker does. It trains the body to predict the whistle and the mind to fear the boil. Invisibility became an identity. It is easy to think vanishing is passive, but it is not. It takes labor. It takes observation. It takes practice. She practiced until even her wants learned to whisper. Yet wants do not die. Under the lid, steam gathers. Sometimes it looks like curiosity about forbidden tools, sometimes like fascination with systems that slice the world into manageable pieces. If you press your ear to that childhood, you can hear the rattle starting to build. Then came the date circled in red, the birthday. The house prepared with a script everyone understood. Balloons that promised joy, a cake that performed normal, songs that sounded almost sincere. She stood inside the choreography and felt the pressure climb to a pitch the rituals could not lower. Birthdays are tests in families like this. They measure what you are allowed to want. They measure what kind of love you are permitted to ask for. She had trained herself to need nothing, yet the need had been learning a different language. It was ready to speak. Every rule in the house had taught her to disguise desire as discipline. On that day, the disguise cracked. The currency of affection had taught her that only certain requests would be honored, and only if they reinforced control. The trial without appeal had taught her that safety arrives when you can prove you will not make a mess. Under those terms, the wish she was about to voice made terrible sense. The child who mastered invisibility was about to make herself unmistakably visible, not by breaking the rules, but by asking for the kind of power those rules worshipped. The lid would finally lift, and the steam would rush out. And for a breathless moment, the house would see the shape the pressure had made. Before you continue with this content that reveals the hidden side of human behavior, you need to check out the ebook Manipulation. Inside, you'll uncover the mechanisms behind mind control, behavioral influence, and the silent strategies used by people who manipulate their environment without being noticed. It's a true map of the mind. You'll learn how real psychological control techniques work, and how some individuals camouflage, strike, and influence others while staying invisible. You need to take this knowledge to the next level, because in the psychological game, those who don't understand become pawns. After the video ends, open the link in the description and get the ebook. The candles burned down in a perfect line, 10 small fires trembling on a cake that tried very hard to look like celebration. Around the table, the ritual moved on schedule. A camera phone hovered, a chorus of voices, layered into a cheerful approximation of warmth. She stood still in the center of it, a child who knew how to leave no fingerprints on a moment. When the song reached its peak, you could feel the room waiting for a normal wish. The wish that assures everyone the story is safe. The wish that proves childhood is still intact. She inhaled, held it, and in the silence that follows a practiced smile, she asked for something that didn't belong in a party, or a childhood, or a neatly staged family photo. Not toys, not sweets. A lockable knife kit. You just felt the air shift. You are the parent at that table now. Do you laugh as if you misheard? Do you correct the request and offer a catalog of acceptable alternatives? Do you glance at another adult for rescue? A private agreement that this is only a phase, a strange turn of phrasing, a moment you can tidy away? Or do you finally ask why? The word sits heavy between plates and paper napkins. Why is a door in this house? It opens to rooms no one wants to clean. She did not say it with the bravado of a child showing off a dangerous word. She said it the way she said everything else, measured, precise, as if she were filing the universe into categories she could survive. Not for play, she explained with eyes that never broke contact. For learning, for control, for feeling safe. The phrases stack like a diagram from a textbook on criminal psychology. When safety has always been conditional, power starts to look like comfort. When rules are weapons, equipment begins to feel like armor. If you are still at the table, you are calculating. Even if you don't want to admit it, you are thinking about the optics, the neighbors, the school guidance counselor with careful handwriting. You are thinking about the stories in the news and the way labels stick. You are thinking about your own fear, which arrived faster than the room could swallow the request. But the child is not thinking about symbols or headlines. She is thinking about the way her body finally relaxes when a system is under her control, the way the mind rehearses catastrophe and quiets only when it believes it can decide the outcome. Forensic psychology would tell you that the interest is not the object, but the function, not the blade, but the boundary. She had learned that edges are trustworthy, lines are reliable, rituals end when you reach the last step. In a life built around punishment without appeal, sharpness promises clarity. There is an honesty to edges that words rarely grant in that house. A kit with locks answers to her. It opens for her. It responds to skill and attention, not mood. Can you hear what she is asking for beneath the request? The architecture of safety she has never had, scaled to something her small hands can manage. The table is a jury. Someone clears a throat. Someone else tries a joke that dies on the plate like a cut piece of fruit. The candle smoke spirals, making a faint haze that blurs the border between faces and masks. She is still, not with the stubbornness of defiance, but with the discipline of a student presenting her research. She speaks the way she lines up pencils, each word a measurement. She will not argue. She will not plead. She is not asking to shock. She is showing you the only path that makes sense in a map carved by pressure. Ask yourself who taught her that control equals safety. You might think of a door slammed at the wrong time, a rule enforced for the relief of the enforcer rather than the growth of the child, an apology demanded without accountability returned. You might remember the lessons of intermittent affection and how they trained her to chase certainty the way thirsty children chase a glass that never fills. In that context, a lockable kit is not deviance. It is a prayer. The vocabulary is alarming, but the sentiment is ordinary. Let me be safe. Let me decide when the danger ends. Do you say yes? Some parents would, calculating that supervised learning demystifies and diffuses. Some would say no, as if denial disarms the need. But both choices miss the question that matters most. Why do you want this? Why does your body exhale at the idea of control? Why does safety feel like an object with edges instead of a person who listens when you speak? The why is the room everyone has avoided, because it cannot be cleaned with rules. It is messy and unscored and full of echoes you will not like. If you listen, you will hear that her answer is not about hurting. It is about not being hurt. It is about having something that obeys when she turns the lock, a sensation she cannot summon from the adults who change temperatures without warning. The criminal mind does not appear here as a monster, but as a child who has mistaken power for peace, because peace has never arrived without a cost. Deviant behavior does not live in the object. It lives in the lesson that the object has come to symbolize. Is this a rehearsal for harm or a rehearsal for relief? The difference hinges on whether someone asks the forbidden question and stays to hear the truth. Consider the way she watches the adults now, not with fear, with study. She is collecting data. Will you punish the request? Will you deny it in a way that confirms what she already believes about love and its conditions? Will you give it to her and call it bonding while leaving the wound intact? Or will you do the most radical thing in a house like this? Will you pause the ritual and ask her to teach you the shape of her fear? The table goes quiet in a deeper way. Even the camera phone lowers. The birthday song has long ended, but what replaces it might be the first real conversation this family has ever had. She does not know how to ask for safety with the language most children use. She knows how to ask for systems. She knows how to ask for control. She knows how to ask for a lock that answers to her hands. You can imagine taking the red circle around this date and drawing another one around the word why. Because that question, asked without accusation, could redirect the current of this story. The gift is a symbol. The request is a diagnosis. The why is the treatment this house has been terrified to attempt. The moment holds. The candles are stubs now, wax blooming into soft puddles. The room smells like sugar and smoke and something metallic you cannot quite name. Every choice from here is a door. Behind one, denial, and the quiet return of pressure. Behind another, permission without understanding, and a future assembled from sharp comforts. Behind the last, a hard, tender excavation of what safety means to a child who has only ever known it as a condition. If you were the parent at that table, which door would you open? The answer will not be given in this instant, but the story will not move forward until someone is brave enough to ask why and stay for the aftershock. Begin beneath the birthday table, where wrapping paper curls like shed skins and wax puddles on plates. Beneath the surface, psychology draws a grid and starts asking colder questions. When a child seeks control, the forensic lens hunts for the wound, trauma that wrinkled the timeline, modeling absorbed by osmosis, from a house where power is a weather system. Rehearsals repeated until they feel like instinct. You do not start by judging the request. You start by mapping the currents that pushed it to shore. Under that light, interest in edges is not exotic. It is diagnostic, a fascination with sharpness, a preference for rule sets, a comfort with procedures that assign every movement a meaning. These are not trophies for a shelf. They are stabilizers. Watch the pattern. The child gravitates to tasks where outcomes are measurable and authority is embedded in the tool. Not because danger excites her, but because the object does what people do not. It respects the terms of engagement. It is indifferent to moods. It answers to skill, not volatility. There is relief in that, the kind that makes breath travel the full distance in the lungs for the first time all day. Forensic casework repeats this caution until it becomes a mantra. Do not confuse the symbol for the story. The kit is a symbol. The story is the ache for predictability in a world that punishes without pattern. The red flags drift up like sparks from a match, and most adults swat at the wrong flame. They see interest in dangerous tools and fear harm to others, when the more immediate risk is harm folded inward. They perceive rule obsession as rigidity, when it might be a shield that keeps panic from spilling into public view. They notice empathy dimming at inconvenient moments and conclude coldness when the switch was thrown long ago to keep the system from overloading. Think of the everyday scenes that never made it into the photo roll. The time a classroom fire drill shrieked unexpectedly and she did not flinch because she had trained herself not to react to sudden temperature changes. The afternoon a friend scraped a knee and looked to her for help, and she moved mechanically rather than warmly, because procedure felt safer than feeling. The morning she corrected a teacher's instructions with chilling accuracy, not to challenge authority, but to keep the sequence from collapsing into chaos. If you want to read a forensic map, you learn to track not only events, but the nervous system's choreography around them. Trauma does not always announce itself with spectacle. Sometimes it arrives as a schedule enforced like law. Sometimes it is the muting of tenderness, the rationing of affection, until the child internalizes scarcity as normal. Sometimes it is modeling, the lesson learned from a caretaker who treats control as virtue and vulnerability as a defect. Children rehearse what works. If compliance buys quiet, compliance is rehearsed. If precision keeps tempers contained, precision becomes a religion. If power is the only language adults respect, power is the language the child begins to practice in whispers. This is where the myth of a monster must be disarmed. You are not looking at an origin story dripping with inevitability. You are holding a map of ignored signals, each one small enough to pass as personality. The habit of scanning exits, the preference for instruments over imagination, the way play feels unsafe unless it has a rule book, the tendency to go cold in an argument not from malice, but from conserving resources. Even the neatly folded shirt, the zippered backpack, the desk arranged to military precision. Each detail is an entry on the ledger of a coping system that outgrew its purpose and started colonizing everything. When you ask what hides inside the gift, the first answer is not violence. It is sanctuary, a lock she can carry, a boundary that holds, a ritual that does not change its mind in the middle. It is the promise that a small piece of the world will obey predictable laws, even if the kitchen and the calendar do not. To label that hunger as deviance is to miss the invitation. The child is telling you where safety lives in her body. She is showing you the blueprint she built because no adult offered one that did not collapse. There is another layer the forensic mindset refuses to ignore. Power rehearsal. You can hear it in the cadence of her explanation, the measured language that frames the request as learning and control rather than thrill. She is trialing a posture, the posture of someone who cannot be knocked off balance by surprise. That rehearsal can swing two ways. In an environment where empathy is welcomed back into the room, the practice becomes leadership of the self, competence unhooked from fear. In an environment that keeps punishing need, the practice calcifies and control starts to mimic the coldness that birthed it. The map is not destiny. It is a decision tree. Risk lives here, yes, but it wears nuance. Red flags do not guarantee a direction. They signal a need. for intervention that dignifies rather than shames. The fascination with sharp objects calls for supervised demystification and honest conversation about symbolism, not theatrical bands that inflate the object's power. The rule obsession beckons for gentle, flexible structures where mistakes lead to repair rather than verdict. The empathy switch needs safe practice turning back on, not accusations that it is broken beyond use. Each response is a pivot point. Each misstep reaffirms the old lesson, that only control keeps the system from crushing her. So what do you do with the kit in the mind before any item enters a cart? You translate safety into human terms she can trust. You borrow the clarity she worships and use it to define boundaries that protect without humiliating. You replace trials without appeal with accountability that does not paste shame onto curiosity. You teach that control can include asking for help, that competence expands when you let others stand beside you without taking the wheel. You put language where silence once trained the nervous system to brace. When she names fear, you treat it like data rather than drama. The real need hidden inside the gift is clean and old and human. It is the need to breathe without scanning the horizon for a sudden storm. It is the need for a space where edges do not mean weapons, but frames that hold a picture in place. It is the need to decide something in a life where everything is decided for you. She is not building a shrine to harm. She is constructing a tiny refuge with the only materials that make sense in a house that never kept its promise. If you can read the map, you can meet her where the signals converge, not with spectacle, not with panic, with the kind of steadiness that makes a lock unnecessary because the door finally, the room had cooled with thin, the kind that makes small sound, a spoon touch scrape. Someone finally asked the forbidden question, the one that opens doors no one wants to look behind. What would having this make you feel? She did not hesitate. Safe, she said, and heard. The words landed like weights set on a scale, and for a heartbeat the entire house measured itself against them. Safe, in a place that had trained her to be quiet instead. Heard, in a family that prized compliance more than confession. The truth was not theatrical, it was painfully plain. Sometimes the scariest request is a child's quiet SOS. The moral edge had arrived, gleaming and impossible to ignore. On one side was the instinct to protect at all costs by banning, hiding, shaming, declaring the topic unfit for children, and thus unthinkable. On the other side was an equally urgent instinct to lean in, to translate the dangerous symbol back into human need, to speak the language she had chosen because no one had offered one that worked better. The adults were a jury without training, and the verdict would turn the current of a life. Do you split the room into right and wrong and force her back into invisibility? Or do you accept that her map of safety includes edges because edges have never lied to her? She watched them openly, the way a scientist watches a reaction. She had presented her data. Control relieved panic. Ritual produced calm. Locks, when they obeyed her hands, produced a kind of music in her chest she could not summon from unpredictability. If they punished the request, they would not teach her to fear harm. They would teach her to fear being known. If they granted the request without understanding, they would feed the symbol and starve the need. Either extreme would reinforce the earliest lesson of that house, that love and safety are separate currencies and both are earned through performance. One adult spoke first, and not with a rule. "Tell me what safe means for you," the child answered in the precise language she trusted. "Safe means no surprises. Safe means steps I can learn. Safe means, if something goes wrong, I know how to make it stop." She did not describe hurting anyone. She described the opposite. She described a nervous system looking for a steady handrail. Another adult said what many were thinking. Do you believe environment can redirect to fate like hers, or are some paths already carved? The question hung there, heavy with the weight of headlines and hindsight. The answer would not be binary. The answer would be a practice, measured across 1,000 unremarkable days that either rewired fear or hardened it. They did not buy the kit that night. They did something stranger. They put the topic on the table and kept it there. They talked about the difference between power that protects and power that punishes. They named the old rules for what they were, not commandments from the sky, but habits of control that had bruised everyone. They apologized for the first time without smuggling blame into the apology. They promised supervision if anything like that tool ever entered the house. And they promised something better than supervision. They promised to build structures where mistakes led to repair instead of trial, where the child could practice being competent without equating competence with control. It was not dramatic. It was delicate, like threading a needle in a storm. For the child, the aftermath was a terrain of small tests. Could she say, "I am overwhelmed," and have someone meet her without ridicule? Could she break a routine and survive the discomfort without being punished for wobbling? Could she practice empathy without hollowing herself out to please? The house learned to intervene in the right direction, not by policing objects, but by naming feelings and anchoring them to choices. They chose rituals that breathed rather than tightened, bedtimes that flexed within limits, chores that rotated to avert obsessive ownership. The change made no noise, but it made space. Yet the moral knife's edge was still there, reminding everyone that vigilance without panic is a difficult balance. There were days when she reached again for control in the old rigid ways. There were moments when she withdrew, when silence felt safer than the risk of being misunderstood. In those moments, someone would recall the birthday air, the weight of the words, safe and heard, and try again to offer both, not with grand gestures, with consistency. Consistency does not trend. Consistency rewires. You might be wondering whether a single question can alter destiny. The forensic lens would caution against magic. Nothing is guaranteed, but there is evidence in the way her gaze softened over time, in the way she began to tolerate noise that used to slice through her, in the way she could sit with a mistake for an extra minute without feeling like the walls were closing in. Once, during a family argument that would have once sent her into lockstep compliance or disappearance, she paused and asked to restate her point. She did not freeze. She did not press for domination. She stayed. That is not headline news. That is a tectonic shift. Was the kit forgotten? Not exactly. It returned as a lesson rather than an idol. They enrolled her in a supervised skills class that had nothing to do with blades and everything to do with competence. She learned to measure, to craft, to focus on process rather than outcome. She learned to ask for help without hearing it as a confession of weakness. She learned that mastery can be about care and creation, not merely about command. The symbol shrank back to its size. The need found new addresses, and yet the story refuses a tidy bow. The path ahead contains weather. There will be days when she longs for the old cold clarity. There will be days when a raised voice floods the corridors with old alarms. There will be days when empathy flickers and the switch is hard to find. The difference now is that the house carries a shared map. The ignored signals are written down. The forbidden question is no longer forbidden. And when a tool appears in a store window or a headline drags an old fear into the light, there is language to place between impulse and action. The environment cannot erase history, but it can offer a future that is not governed by its worst chapters. If you have listened this far, you are part of the jury too. You have stood at the same edge, in a smaller story of your own, where the scary request was only a translation problem, waiting for patience. Maybe the child in your life asks for control in ways that alarm you. Maybe the child is you, older now, still checking the locks in your head. The hardest truth remains the simplest. The scariest request might be a quiet SOS. The answer, unfinished and demanding, is to hear it and hold your ground without becoming a wall. Tell me below what you would do if that birthday wish landed on your table. Would you ban the symbol, grant it, or ask the question that risks changing? Everything. Your answer matters because the next chapter in this story will test it. What comes after this moment does not belong to chance, and it will connect directly to what you have just seen. I will take you into a space where the lessons of tonight meet a new decision that will not wait. I am not telling you the title yet. I want you to feel the gravity first and carry your answer with you when the next door opens.